Welcome to Code Station.
Welcome back to PHP tutorials. Today we are going to cover loops in PHP. So loops are an essential part of programming and can help you automate repetitive tasks. In this presentation, we will explore the different types of loops provided by PHP and how they work. Understanding loops is crucial for many PHP developers as it allows them to write efficient and effective code. With loops, you can iterate over arrays, perform calculations, and execute code multiple times without having to repeat the code again and again. So, let's begin with loops in PHP. Like any other language, loops in PHP is used to execute a statement or a block of statements multiple times unless and until a specific condition is met. So this helps the user to save both time and effort of writing the same code multiple times. PHP supports 4 types of looping techniques: for loop, while loop, do while loop, and for each loop. We'll go through each and every loop one by one and their syntax and working along with the example. For loops. These types of loops is used when the user knows in advance how many times the block needs to be executed. That is, the number of iteration is known beforehand. These type of loops are also known as entry control loops because if the condition is true, then only the loop starts. So the main difference between loops, for loops and while loops is that for loops are used when you know the number of times you want the code to be executed, whereas while loops are used when you don't know the number of iterations. So there are 3 main parameters to the code, namely the initialization, the test condition, and the counter, as you see in the syntax. So first, the initialization. It is where you set the starting value of the loop variable. Then the condition is the expression that is evaluated before each iteration of the loop. And lastly, the increment is what happens after each iteration of the loop, such as adding 1 to the loop variable, and the loop continues. So here you can see the syntax. For loop, inside the bracket we have the 3 terms, 3 parameters: initialization, first value given, then test condition. If it is true, then the code to be executed, and then for the second loop to be start, the update expression, that is the increment or the decrement value. While loops are also an entry control loop like for loops. It first checks the condition at the start of the loop, and if it is true, then it enters the loop and executes the block of statements similar to for, and goes on executing if the condition holds true. But here the catch is you don't know how many times you need to increment the loop. So while loops are useful when you need to perform a task multiple times, but you don't know exactly how many times it will be needed. For example, you might use a while loop to read data from a file until you reach the end of the file. So you don't know the number of lines in a file. So this process continues until the condition becomes false. So the syntax, while loop and the condition. If the condition is true, the code keeps on executing until the condition becomes false. Here there is no increment decrement to stop the loop. Do while loop is an exit control loop, which means that it first enters the loop, executes the statement once, and then checks the condition. Therefore, a statement is executed at least once using the do while loop before the loop begins or terminates. After executing once, the program is executed if the condition holds true until the condition is true. So in a do while loop, the condition is tested after executing the statement within the loop. This means that do while loop will execute its statement at least once, even if the condition is false. So you can see here in the syntax, do, first we are not taking any conditions, directly enters the loop, executes the statements inside the bracket, and then for while term it checks if the condition is true, then again the loop starts. So the loop continues if the condition is true, but before that the code is executed once. For each loop, this loop is used to iterate over arrays. For every counter of loop, an array element is assigned and the next counter is shifted to the next element. The for each loop works only on arrays and is used to loop through each key and value pair in an array. It simplifies the process of iterating through each element in array or the properties of an object. So let's see the syntax. For each $array, it is the array and as $value. So for every loop iteration, the value of the current array element is assigned to $value and the array pointer is moved by 1 until it reaches the last array element. So let's see a few examples of the loops that we have studied earlier. So we know that loops are used to automate repetitive tasks and handle collections of data efficiently. But we need to be extremely cautious about the loop's conditions are properly managed so that it does not enter an infinite loop. So the most commonly used loop structures in PHP are for, while, do while and for each. So let's start with for loop. The for loop is used when you know the number of iterations and you want to perform, and it consists of 3 parts: initialization, conditions and iteration. So let's write an example. So this is the example for loop. So here there are 3 parts. Then the initialization, then the condition, that is the first, that $I is set to 0, then $I should be less than 5, then the iteration starts, we jumped inside the bracket and then display I. So the I value for each iteration will be printed, and then up to what, that I plus plus. So one in the first iteration it will be 0, it is less than 5, it will print 0. Then it will increment 1, which is also less than 5, it will print 1, and so on until it reaches 5 and exits the loop. So let's check on the browser. Yeah, so 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the $I value reaches to 5 and it ends the loop. So next we have is the while loop. So while loop is used when you want to execute a block of code as long as the specified condition is true, but you don't know how many the iterations, like the iteration you want to perform. Here we knew that we wanted to print it up to 5. So it ends once the value becomes 5. But in while, if we don't know how many times we need to print, that is if you need to print the data until you reach the end of the 5. But you don't know how many lines are there. So you use the while loop. So as you can see, the while loop keeps executing as long as the specified condition remains true. You also notice that the condition is checked beforehand. So if it is false, it might not run, like it won't enter the inside the bracket and not execute the code at all. So let's see. So this is the output of the while loop. So after that the condition is false and it exits the loop. Let's change the condition. Prints nothing because the condition is not true, so it won't execute the code inside it. So similar thing to while loop, we have a do while loop, but it's slightly different. This is known as entry control loop and that is known as exit control loop. So we will see do while loop. Moving on to the do while loop, the do while loop is similar to the while loop, but it ensures the code block runs at least once before checking the condition. The condition is checked after each iteration in a do while loop. Use this when you want to loop to execute once before trying the verifying condition. So here you can see the condition is tested first and then you get the execution. But in do while loop, it first prints one time, like it executes the code one time, and then if the condition is true, then again it starts the loop. So we'll see with an example. So first it executes one time, so that is it will execute 0 and then check the condition. If it's less than 10, then it keep on executing the code until the condition is true. See, it printed then 10 and the loop exits. But let's check the difference. So if the condition is not true, the condition is not true, so the loop should not start. But since it checks the condition at the end of the iteration, it will first print once. There you go. That's the difference between do while and while loop. So the lastly we have for each loop, which is used specifically for array, iterate over array elements. The for loop for each loop is specifically designed to iterate over arrays and objects. It simplifies the process of iterating through each array element. So you know arrays, we have multiple elements stored under a single variable. So to go through each elements and print a single element using echo is a tedious task. So we use this loop which goes over it and prints it for us. So let's see with an example. So this is an example of for each. We have created an array which has 4 elements: red, green, blue, yellow. So initially to print we need to use echo and then the index and 0, then 1, 2. So it is a tedious task. So if you have 100 elements printing 100 echo statements, so here for each loop it will take dollar color arrays and take its single element. Like for each iteration, each element will be stored in this variable and then print, and then again the next element stored in this and the cycle continues till it reaches the end of the array. So let's see. Let's see the result. Red, green, blue, yellow. And simply the 3-step loop which is used to iterate over any array element. Now that we have covered the types of loop, let's see where they come in handy, like the application of the loops. So you might use loops to process arrays like we have just used, also to iterate the properties of objects, and then read records from a database. As we know, consist of multiple records. So loops are used to fetch that proper record from hundreds of records for us. Similarly, to validate user input and much more applications. So before we conclude, there are some points to remember about loops. So firstly, that always make sure that your conditions that you write for a loop to evaluate are accurate. That is, if it's not, then it will go into an infinite loop and keep on executing, which will crash your code. So check that to prevent infinite loop. Nextly, choose meaningful variables, which is a common rule for others to understand. I hope this video helps simplify loops for you. Loops are essential tools for automating repetitive tasks and managing data in your programming. So if used correctly, it can be very helpful to make code efficient and readable. So as you continue your coding, make sure to implement these loops in your projects more and more. So thank you for watching.